Hey Patriots, hope you're doing well today, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the corporatization of video games. Now this video isn't going to be some elaborate video exposing shady shit companies do with games nowadays. There's plenty of other YouTubers out there that talk about that stuff and do it very well. This video is just more of a rant of me just saying how sick I am of the shit we see in so many video games nowadays, especially in AAA video games. And near the end of this video, I'm also going to list off some things that we can do as gamers to send a message to these dog shit companies like EA, Activision, Ubisoft, any other shit company you can toss into the pile. I don't know if it's just me, but it kind of felt like the decline of good games, especially AAA games, seemed like they were falling into a hole after about 2013 to 2014. And as we all remember too, the downfall of COD was pretty much after Ghost came out. Pretty much every entry that came out after that was just soulless and felt like a pathetic attempt to try something new, but just ended badly. Modern Warfare 2019 was the last COD that actually innovated the series pretty well. They added new engine, new gunplay, better graphics, and newer and better animations. COD 2019 did breathe new life into the game until Vanguard came out. I never did buy Vanguard mainly because I knew the game would be dog shit, and boy was I right. But as of right now, the time I am making this video, Modern Warfare 2 2022 hasn't come out yet, so I can't say whether the game is good or not. Only time will tell. But I'm not here to talk about COD. COD was just more or less the catalyst of the downfall of gaming. As I said previously, it seemed like the decline of gaming started to happen around the time of 2013 to 2014. And there really isn't one thing that caused the downfall of gaming, but just a bunch of decisions made by these companies that others for some reason followed and caused these games to become worse and worse every year. The biggest contributor to this was loot boxes. COD Advanced Warfare and Overwatch popularized the implementation of loot boxes, and lots of other games followed this trend too, especially EA. Thankfully, the backlash of the whole loot box meta was kind of laid to rest after Star Wars Battlefront 2. The campaign sucked from what I heard, but the multiplayer was phenomenal. I played it myself and had lots of fun with my friends with it too. It's just the loot boxes took out any form of grind that would be enjoyable. They took out the fun parts of these games and shoved them into paid conveniences. It was a shit meta that these games were following for a good few years. Hell, it was so bad the European government was wanting to take action against it, wanting to hold EA financially accountable for basically promoting gambling in their games. And I don't give a fuck about what your opinions are on loot boxes, but I'm sure most of us would agree that loot boxes are gambling. And thankfully, after all the backlash from people basically being sick of loot boxes and the government threatening EA, they quit with the loot box shit. I don't remember if they completely removed loot boxes or they severely toned them down, but either way, they aren't as bad as they used to be. But loot boxes aren't the end of it, mainly because loot boxes were basically just a beginning, and now we are left with the meta of unfinished games. I feel like the opinions on unfinished games might be different depending on what kind of game you're talking about. The fact is, the unfinished games meta might be the worst one we're facing right now. And the reason why is because all of these game companies now either half-ass a game or cut content from the game and start slowly shoving shit into the game. And what started this meta was DayZ. DayZ is known to this day as being the game that started the unfinished meta. When game companies learned that people would be willing to pay money for an unfinished game and keep playing it on the promise of being worked on, well, they just ran away with it. I don't have a problem with every game that releases in an unfinished state. Your smaller indie devs have way more leeway with releasing an unfinished game and work on it more after they release whatever build they put out there. The problem is AAA companies have started to follow this trend as well. The biggest example of these are COD, Battlefield 2042, and the newest Saints Row game. Now you're probably wondering why I bring up COD. I did just say COD rejuvenated the series with Modern Warfare 2019. However, COD 2042 and the new Saints Row game and so many other games have come out unfinished with the promise of adding more later. COD is really bad about this by cutting out content such as like guns, cosmetics, and put them later in battle passes, so you have to pay $10 just to unlock the shit that should have been in the game at day one. And I don't have to talk about 2042. You already know about 2042. Same with the newest Saints Row game. I get so sick and tired of these games releasing unfinished and having to wait for the day one patches just to fix these pieces of garbage when they should have been playable day one. And if you're thinking I'm being too harsh, that I just don't understand game development, the matter of the fact is that is just not true. I'm very well aware of how hard game development is. In order to make these big games that we play, it takes up to hundreds of employees to make. And not just programmers exclusively. You need artists, level designers, story writers, managers to keep these employees in line with the product they're working on, animators, and so on. It's a massive undertaking to make these games, and it is true that these games are getting harder to make, with newer technology coming out to make these games better mechanically is difficult, especially when they have to learn these things on the fly. But the biggest problem isn't development itself, it's the fact that these big corporation bosses don't understand this shit and they stomp their feet and say, I want this game released now because I want money. And that is why more and more AAA companies keep making these shit games, because they force these employees to work like slaves and end up making a product that represents their work environment. Now, that isn't to say that not every game developer just isn't incompetent. There are many examples of incompetent game developers, mainly Ubisoft. Not all Ubisoft devs are incompetent, but a large majority of them are. That's why every year we get a half-assed game that is nothing more than an empty shell of Assassin's Creed or whatever game they've milked for the past several years. Another company that is completely incompetent is 343. I've never seen so many people in leadership positions that have no fucking clue how to make a Halo game. Instead, they think making a Halo ripoff of Apex Legends is the audience that likes Halo, when it's the complete opposite. We want Halo, not the stupid crap that we got with Halo Infinite. The only sense of what little direction they could vision was the campaign. Infinite's campaign wasn't bad, but that's an awfully lot amount of praise I can give for 343. But I guess credit is due where credit's due. And Jesus Christ, don't get me started on microtransactions. There are very few games where microtransactions are justifiable and are done right. In my opinion, there is no excuse for AAA companies to cut content and shove it into their shit game as paid content and acting like it's brand new. And Halo Infinite is extremely bad at this. It's one of the reasons why I've completely quit the game. The devs have no clue what to do with the game, so they make these shitty half-ass events and add in ugly armor pieces and call it a day. I don't know, man. I'm just sick of all the shit the companies keep doing in these times. If they keep it up, they might just ruin games as a whole. There is the alternative of indie games, but even with indie games, there just aren't a lot of indie games that are all that good. It just feels like every indie game nowadays is just some platformer that copies their childhood game. Now look, if that's your thing, then by all means keep consuming that product. If it's good and you enjoy it and the developers put effort into it, they absolutely deserve the purchase. But as I said, not all indie games are good, and it's rare when we do get a good one. And look, I know the point of indie games are supposed to be unique niche games, but let's just say what needs to be said. That is, not all indie games are good. I also want to say this as well, I'm not shitting on indie games. I believe indie games are the way of the future, but as of right now, there just doesn't seem to be any unique vision for indie games at the moment. Whenever I scroll through Steam, I see one indie game and the other one below it looks almost just the same. As of right now, the way I see it, indie developers don't have the funding or support to fully bring out their true vision, and AAA companies are so starved for vision yet so greedy they refuse to spend extra money for better vision. They just see something that's popular with one thing and they try to add their own little spin onto it, and it just makes it look like a cheap knockoff of the original. The standards in the gaming industry are at the lowest it's ever been, and unless we raise the bar ourselves by not spending our hard-earned money on their trash, nothing is ever going to change. As I stated earlier in the video, I've made a list of things we can do as consumers to make these companies understand that we are not their bitches and it's the other way around. First off, we gotta stop pre-ordering games, mainly AAA games. There is no excuse as to why we should preemptively give these corporations our money when we haven't even received the product. It just encourages them to create this FOMO with in-game items by dangling them on a stick in front of you, trying to get you to pre-order the game so you don't miss out. Like seriously, I don't care how hyped you are for Modern Warfare 2022. The fact that they are trying to get you to pay for the game before it's even out just so you can play the campaign early is pathetic. If you don't want spoilers, stay off the internet until you play it. Stop pre-ordering, wait for the game to come out before you buy it just to make sure it's worth your money. Secondly, stop paying for microtransactions in paid games. If the game is free to play and is made by a smaller dev studio, then I judge you less for spending money on that game, especially if the devs are worthy of it. But games like COD and other games you paid full price for, stop paying for the little cosmetics they dangle in your face. It just promotes them to cut content out of the game to only shove it back in months later after release so they can pretend it's content. Third, stop paying for super pricey bundles. It just promotes these companies to cut items that should just be in the game and put them behind a paywall to make your ego bigger by making you think you have exclusivity. Fourth, stop paying for unfinished games. As I said before, if it's a small indie team, then they get a little bit more leeway for releasing an unfinished game as long as they actually work on it, but bigger game studios, especially AAA studios, have absolutely no excuse for releasing a broken game that needs a day one patch. If these game studios keep getting away with releasing 2042s on the promise of fixing them, we're only going to keep getting this crap and we only have ourselves to blame. Make these companies work for your purchase like how they used to. And 5, stop overhyping games. Look at what happened with Cyberpunk. Gamers overhyped the game and they ended up trying to deliver more than what they could promise. I'm not trying to blame the gamers for the failure of Cyberpunk. CDPR was in way over their heads and they failed to fully express to us how unfinished the game was. But however, when they saw the hype around the game, why wouldn't they run with it? They made so much money from the hype itself and not just from the game. Stop letting these companies trick you into hyping up their game all because they showed you a pretty teaser. How many times has Ubisoft showed us a pretty trailer and ended up being a discount of what was shown? We're better than this, and the only way things will change is if we change our standards. We need to stop letting these companies brainwash us into thinking these new standards they created are the new standards. Games were made better because there was no room for error. These companies have too much room for error now and they go unpunished when they do fail. We need to stop. We need to do better.